When we think of the Egyptians, we think of that great civilization of the past, thousands of years ahead of its time. And when we think of Egypt, we think of the pyramids, the Sphinx, the society, Cleopatra, Tutankhamun, the mummies. Ancient Egypt saw some of the earliest developments of writing, agriculture, urbanization, organized religion, and central government. Here's an interesting fact. Roughly 4 to 5% of the land in Egypt is next to the Nile, and 99% of the population of Egypt live in that region. The rest of the country is predominantly desert that is very sparsely populated. The amazing Egyptian era came to an end when they were taken over by the Romans, and before that the Persians and the Greeks. But they were a name and a force to be reckoned with around the world. Egypt has a lot of history, but also it's geographically very crucial as well. One, it's next door to Israel, which we'll come on to in a minute. Also, the Suez Canal passes through Egypt, which is one of the major global shipping routes connecting Europe with Asia. It's also home of the Coptic Christians. The majority of Egyptians eventually became Christians under Emperor Constantine and the Roman Church. In recent history, Egypt has now become Islamized and is now an Islamic majority with a strong Christian minority known as the Coptics. The recent headlines we've seen, I suppose, is the Arab Spring, which I'll put a few headlines up here, and also around about 2011 Egypt has recently been rocked by turmoil and unrest, with the long-time ruler Hosni Mubarak was removed from power in 2011, and some people are saying that this is a harbinger of Bible prophecy to be fulfilled and has led to the rise of radical Islam in the nation. So what we're going to do, that's the introduction, we're going to look at basically similar to the last video, we're going to look at where does Egypt appear in the Bible and what role does it have to play in prophecy, and then I'll just tag on a few headlines at the end, sort of recent developments. But it does have a role to play in end times prophecy, and I will show you the possible roles it has. Some are more concrete than others, but that's the way it is with prophecy, isn't it? So what we're going to do first is go on to the biblical history, how Egypt actually appears in the Bible. So first off, the word Egypt appears over 700 times in the Bible, which is, it nearly appears 750 times, and Pharaoh is mentioned over 200 times. As we know, he was the ruler over Egypt, a number of pharaohs. There is a very important Bible verse concerning the children of Israel that is tied up with Egypt, and it is in Deuteronomy 23:7. Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. And that's referring to the times of Exodus. And if we go into Genesis 10:6 mentions Egypt again. This is the sons of Noah after the flood. Basically, these are, they call it the generations of Noah. And in Genesis 10:6, it says, and the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. Now, Mizraim is another name for Egypt. And you'll find, if you read the whole of Genesis 10, you'll get if you read the first verse. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. Basically, Ham is the father of Egypt, I suppose, really. And all those people that are mentioned there, all the different names, they are basically, I suppose, the Gentiles that we see in the world now. If we go into Genesis 15:18, Egypt's mentioned again, and it says, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land. This is referring to the promised land, isn't it? From the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So anything between that. Some people are debating whether the river is the Nile or whether it is further up towards the border of Israel, but that is the promised land that is mentioned by the Lord. But yes, throughout the Bible it's very similar. The relationship that Egypt has to Israel is I wouldn't say it's as close as Saudi Arabia, but it's a very similar situation. It's a neighbouring country, and it seems to be a place that Israel runs to in times of trouble. If we go through a long list of things, I just want to skim through quite a few of them. There's loads of examples, but in Genesis 12:10, Abraham had to go to Egypt because of drought and famine. And also in Genesis 42, 1-3, the sons of Jacob, they repeated the same move again. They went to Egypt seeking sanctuary. And then Joseph, the children of Israel were in Egypt for 400 years. And then, Egypt's mentioned with the Exodus, in Exodus with the 10 plagues and Pharaoh. We all know about that, don't we? Solomon and Egypt is mentioned again in 1 Kings 3:1, marries Pharaoh's daughter. So that happens. And also he ends up doing a lot of trade with Egypt. Egypt also conquers Jerusalem, which was ruled by then Rehoboam. And also Jeremiah the prophet was taken to Egypt, where he died. Also, if we go into the New Testament, Jesus as a baby with Joseph and Mary, they fled to Egypt to protect the family from the wrath of Herod the Great, who was looking to kill Jesus. And they fled to Egypt. It seems to be a sort of a sanctuary. The history is there, but there has been conflicts as well. The important thing is, Bible can be quite sexist at times. It's quite focused on the men, isn't it? But Abraham did produce offspring from Hagar. I did mention this in the other video, and she was Egyptian. And the offspring included, it was Ishmael, and he married an Egyptian. And then if we go into, again, another crucial role was Moses himself was found by Pharaoh's daughter, and in the rushes, I remember this Bible verse as a kid. She took him in and raised him as if she was, he was her own, And so if you look back at that situation, what would have happened if that Moses hadn't been found? The 10 Commandments, all these things, he played a crucial role, didn't he? I know the Lord made the covenant with Abraham, but the 10 Commandments, Moses actually brought those things down, didn't he? So if it wasn't for that Pharaoh's daughter, then Moses may not have lived to see the day to actually fulfill what he was put on this planet to do. Right, so the next section now is we're going to look at what role does Egypt play in Bible prophecy. And again, I think a lot of people it's a lot of speculation on this, but we'll look at basically the major and minor prophets. It's mentioned all over the place, but it does have a role to play. Where it is mentioned is Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Daniel. That's the major prophets, and there's also some mention in the minor prophets of Joel, Hosea, Micah and Zechariah. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cover the ones that I think scream that Egypt is involved in that prophecy.